spooky tales from medieval Iceland. Right, I've chosen this saga, which is a family saga, so it's not a legendary saga. The legendary sagas are the ones rather known for their content in fantastic happenings, but I've chosen a family saga because it is more interesting in the way history and the supernatural, magical, and so on get intertwined. First of all, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what family sagas are, about the place of this particular saga in the medieval Icelandic landscape, its main episodes, and then I'm going to discuss the episodes that contain supernatural events. So we have undead, we have ghosts, we have some berserkers as well, and some witchcraft. So it should be very interesting. So, like I said, the Eyrbyggja Saga, the saga of the people of Eyri, is part of what we deem today as family sagas. These are sagas written in medieval Iceland, so essentially in the 13th and 14th century. And they include sagas such as the Bandamanna Saga, the saga of the people of the Confederates, Gunnlaug Saga Omstungu, that would be the saga of Gunnlaug Serpentung, Hrafnkell Saga Frey's Goda, that would be the saga of Hrafnkell, the priest of Freyr, Laxdöla Saga, the saga of the people of the Valley of the Solman, Njol Saga, perhaps the best known one, the saga of burnt Njol, and then again, we have here the Eyrbyggja Saga. There have always been problems with classifying these sagas, the chronological difficulty, so dividing them into early sagas, classical sagas, and post-classical sagas has always been difficult, because for a very long time we had this assumption that the context described in the contemporary sagas, so that would be the sagas written in the so-called Sturlunga Age. The Sturlunga Age was a very problematic period in the history of Iceland, because it is essentially the period when several chieftains in Iceland become dominant on the island, and it ends with Iceland losing its independence and going under the control of the Norwegian crown. So there has been this assumption that somehow this age was very different, radically different than the ages described before that. However, we are rather dealing with a gradual evolution. So this extreme tension would be seen as a catalyst for the more mature sagas, but it is not a tension that pops up out of nowhere. And as we shall see in the example of the saga of the people of Eyri as well, we have a lot of social commentary, social and historical commentary. These supernatural episodes also tell us a great deal about the tensions in society at the respective place. So they're not used just to scare people off or for entertainment. They actually carry this anthropological and cultural element to it. But generally speaking, we tend to consider the family sagas as being more realistic. If you will, you can describe them as historical novels, a little bit avant la lettre, but at any rate, all the sagas seem to have this mixed character, so they contain both realistic elements and fantastical elements. And this saga is a very good example of it. So the saga of the people of Eyri is a 13th century family saga, and the main, let's say, conflict here described is that between two very important chieftains, between Snorri Goði and Arnkell Goði. Now, the term Goði is very interesting because in older times it was used to describe both the political office and the religious office. So religion was something that was very much blended in with politics, and if you were an important chieftain in an area, you were automatically also the one dealing with the religious aspects, rituals as well. And they resided in the Snaefellsnes peninsula. This is in Western Iceland, and it has also become very popular as a tourist destination in the past years because it contains some very interesting places such as the Kirkjufell mountain. That would be one of the filming locations for the Game of Thrones, and so on. So at any rate, it's a very well-known tourist destination nowadays. Now, the Eyrbyggja Saga is not really a coherent text, and this is something that has been criticized. Like if you compare it with the better-known sagas, such as the saga of Njol or the saga of the people of Laxdøl, Solomon Valley, it has gotten its fair share of criticism because it's not really that coherent. It's very hard to follow. There are episodes that seem to be more or less related to each other. The, let's say, common thread between them would be the personality of Snorri Goði. So essentially, all the saga is built around this very central character in order to show him as being, let's say, the winner from all these feuds and conflicts that are happening in the saga. And yes, we do have a high degree of mixed historical realism and, let's say, Gothic imagination in the saga. And it is a saga that engages a lot with the past, with the ancient past. We have a couple of elements that we can deem as pagan. We also have a lot of superstitions and lore in the saga, and the background for it would be the conversion period as well. The most ghosts and undead actually come into the story after the conversion or during the conversion period to show the tensions in society and the way the past keeps on haunting people, not leaving them alone, so basically forcing them to engage with their ancient past, and as a way of challenging them to accept a new social order, or perhaps to reject it. The text of Eyrbyggja Saga is also very interesting. It has a story of its own. Many manuscripts of the saga we can find in the 1600s, so quite a long time after the saga was written. And Árni Magnússon, who is the great collector of these manuscripts, noted that they are all descended from the Book of Vatnsson. That would be a farm in western Iceland. So Vatnshyrna is this very big manuscript. It contains several sagas in the collection. These sagas were in the collection of Peter Hesen, but unfortunately this manuscript was destroyed in the Great Fire of Copenhagen from 1728. The genealogies in the first saga of the manuscript, which would be the Flóamanna saga, go back to a wealthy farmer in the Hunavats region in northern Iceland. So perhaps these works were written for him. He is also the one who commissioned another very important manuscript, perhaps the most important manuscript ever written in Icelandic, which is the Flateyjarbók. So Vatnshyrna was copied before the fire, so we were lucky this time, and it has been demonstrated based on orthography that we are dealing with 14th century orthography, and the resemblance is uncanny to the orthography of Magnus Thorhalsson, who was a scribe who was also involved in the creation of the Flateyjarbók. The text in Vatnshyrna would have been the most complete text for this saga, and it was also the basis for most editions. The saga was most likely composed sometime between 1230 and 1270, perhaps by Sturla Þórðarson. He was one of the descendants of Snorri Goði, and it is quite a bit of a regional history here, perhaps intended to show that the ancestors of Sturla and his kinsmen were the best in Iceland, and they actually deserved all the credit, and they deserve to be regarded as the most important chieftains. We also have an interesting historical context here. Speaking of the church, we're dealing with a power struggle between the bishop Guðmund of Hólar, which was one of the seats of the Church of Iceland next to Skalholt. And then on the other hand, we have these people from the Sturluga clan who are, more or less content with the fact that the church is gaining more and more power. Right, so if you read the saga, you're going to see that the first part, so the first chapters actually describe a world full of violence, of internal strain, and of feuds. And you don't really get the impression that we're dealing with a very organized society, with a very ordered civilization. This occurs later on in the saga, so you can notice this progression. So essentially, the saga would describe a community progressing from lawlessness to collective responsibility. You can also see that in the character of Snorri Goði, who is this very ambitious and violent man at the beginning, but then towards the end of the saga, he becomes this protector of the community. So he's essentially forced into this new role. So by the time the saga was written in the 13th century, Icelandic society was in decline, so to speak, and it could be seen as essentially nostalgic, taking pride in the past rather than the author's own times. But we're not dealing only with nostalgia, we're also dealing with quite a harsh view of the past, so very uncompromising past from many respects. It is very tempting to speculate that this work would have been written in the region of the Helgafell mountain, literally the holy mountain. And this was actually an important intellectual center and a scriptorium in the 12th century. And two of the heads of the house were direct descendants of this guy, Snorri, the priest, or Snorri Goði. It has been suggested as well that the Eyrbyggja Saga and Laxdœla Saga were composed at about the same time, and that they kind of used each other's themes and topics. Eyrbyggja Saga displays some indications that the author was aware of the material discussed in the Laxdœla Saga. So here is Helgafell, this important center I mentioned before. It was also the settlement where Snorri Goði actually had his affairs. You can see it here on the map. This is the Snaefellsnes peninsula, and essentially all the saga happens here on the coast. So we are in western Iceland. Now, let's talk a little bit about the main episodes of the saga very briefly. So between chapters 1 and 8, you can read about how Icelanders arrived to Iceland. You are going to find information about Harald Fairhair. This is something that's recurrent in a lot of sagas, this idea that Icelanders decided to settle here because of the pressures they were submitted to by the unfair king Harald Fairhair. Two of these people are particularly described, Thorolfur Mostraskegg and Bjorn the Easterner. Thorolfur is described as a priest of Thor. That's also very interesting in this attempt of medieval Icelanders to engage with the pagan past. And it is said that Thorolf gave the name Thorsnes to this region between Vigrafjord and Hofsvag, and the mountain itself was considered to be so sacred that no living creature on this mountain, neither man nor beast, could have been harmed until it left the mountain on its own will. And Thorolf, as well as his kinsmen, had this very strong conviction that they would actually go into the mountain when they were dead. And he also used the mountain to hold all his courts here on this point of the headland, where it is said that Thor himself had come ashore. And the place was so holy that they also established that no one would be allowed to desecrate it. So if you wanted to ease yourself, there was a special privy for you to do that, which is called drittsker. So that would literally mean the dirt scary. Then, beginning with chapter 9, we have a lot of conflicts and quarrels going on between the descendants of Bjorn the Eastern and Thorolf Mostraskegg. The next generations are involved in these conflicts. So trouble begins between the people of Thorsnes, who are descendants of this Thorolf guy, and then you have the sons of Kjallak on the other hand, Kjallak being the son of Bjorn the Easterner. So both families have become very powerful, and little things, perhaps we can regard them as little things from today's perspective, but back in the day, anything could lead to an insult or some kind of problem, and the respective parties would engage in a conflict immediately. So this time, for example, we're dealing with the refusal of the sons of Kjalak to go out to this special place, Dritsker, in order to ease themselves, and this was interpreted as an attempt to desecrate the mountain because they did not want to respect this rule. So a battle is fought between the followers of Thorarin the Black, that would be a guy related to the sons of Kjalak by marriage, and Thorbjorn the Stout, who was related by marriage to Snorri the priest, who was a descendant of Thorolf Mostraskeg, who was the settler. So you can see from the very beginning how complicated these family relationships are. Now, there follows another quarrel, this time the alleged theft of some horses, which again, to a modern day reader, this might seem as something that can be settled, well, at any rate, with more ease than just going to battle. But back in the day, it was not really that easy because pride and ambition played a very important part. So this again leads to a great deal of violence, and this is solved by the skillful talents of Snorri, who actually offers aid in relation to some troublesome berserkers I will talk about later, to Styr, who is one of the leading people of the other clan, of the clan of the of Kjalak. And because he helps him solve this problem, he marries the daughter of this guy Styr, and we are told that this helped actually quell the conflict, at least for a while. But then again, we are coming to the we arrive to the most important conflict of the whole saga, which is the conflict between Snorri Gothi and Arnkel. Arnkel, the son of Thorolf Twistfoot, who is our undead character in this story. So Arnkel is really a role model in the saga. He's described in very high words. He's described as generous and kind, and also very skillful. He is also a temple priest, and he and Snorri are two of the greatest men in the district, so to speak. So people, whenever they have problems, they come to either Snorri or Arnkel. But once again, it seems that pride and honor and ambition will not allow these two to coexist, and it is kind of inevitable for them to come to another conflict. And Snorri, with his blood brothers, they organize the killing of Arnkel after a series of machinations. Also, because of the father of Arnkel, Thorolf, he constantly tries to egg his son to go into a conflict with Snorri. Arnkel tries to avoid it as much as he can, but actually Snorri is the one pushing into that direction because he really desires more power. And at some point there is also this conversation at a feast, which he interprets as an insult. The conversation goes something like this. He is actually criticized by some of his own followers for being a coward, for not being able to request compensation for one of his people who had been killed by Arnkel. And following this episode, Snorri gets very angry, and he manages to convince his blood brothers, the Storbrandsons, to organize something in order to kill Arnkel, and this is actually successful. But the conflicts don't stop here. The next episode involves Snorri and his blood brothers versus another character by the name of Bjorn. This is a man from Breidavik, so from another region, who had an affair with Snorri's married sister Thurid. And Thurid's son Kjartan is the child of this guy Bjorn, so not of her husband, which would have been regarded as a great disgrace. So the husband of Thurid, Thorod, appeals to Snorri for help. However, this is only the surface. There's also brooding tension going on. As usual, some trivial stuff also mentioned in the saga, such as a piece of turf thrown at someone and so on. At any rate, Snorri sends a slave on a mission to kill one of the men of Breidavik, and then Bjorn and his brother catch and kill the slave. There follow two great battles of Aftafjord and Vigrafjord, and then a dilemma, the dilemma of Styr, I mentioned earlier, who is not only a member of the Kjalak clan, but he is also tied by blood to Snorri's enemies. He's also Snorri's father-in-law, because his daughter married Snorri following the conflict related to the berserkers. So Snorri helped him with the berserkers, and now he is related to both clans. And it is described that at some point in the battle, when Styr is fighting against Snorri, at some point Snorri's 12-year-old son gets wounded, and then he greatly exaggerates by telling Styr that his boy is dying because of him, and Styr feels bad, and he switches sides, and he sets out to kill Bjorn. Eventually he doesn't really get killed, but he is only persuaded to leave Iceland. And the last episode of the saga involves the conversion period, so the period with the Christianity, or the arrival of the Christianity, and it is in this later part of the saga that we find a different Snorri, not the warmonger he used to be in the first part of the saga, but this time he is someone who tries to persuade Icelanders to become more responsible, and he is also the one trying to persuade Icelanders to embrace Christianity. And we have the most entertaining episodes here. The one with the undead woman by the name of Thorgunna, who is an immigrant from the Hebrides, and she has a bit of a conflict with Thurid, so Snorri's sister, because she stays with her, and Thurid desires her fine clothes, but she cannot have them, and then she comes back as a revenant following this episode, and then she might be the cause of other revenants also coming to haunt these new Christian Icelanders. And well, the story develops in such a way that we also have Thorolf, the father of Ankel, in the story, who makes a second apparition as a revenant. So this is really the part of the saga, so between chapters 49 and 55, where we have all these ghosts, all these elements of the pagan past coming to haunt this new world. And eventually, Snorri is the winner of the saga. He's the one who gets to be the greatest chieftain after an encounter with a Viking, and then it is described how he acts. He really acts on behalf of society against violence, against lawlessness, and he leads the farmers in battle against this Viking and his band of troublemakers, and eventually he is recognized by everyone as being the best from the region. So the paranormal activity in Eyrbyggja Saga can be summarized in, let's say, about 5 episodes. The first 3 episodes involve the undead. So we have the haunting of Thorolf Twistfoot, or Lamefoot, Thorolfur Bægifótur. This is the father of Arnkel I mentioned earlier. And then we have the haunting of a woman this time, a Hebridean woman by the name of Thorgunna, who is not necessarily violent. She rather has the role of making people wonder about their actions and bringing some balance to society. I'll explain a little bit later. And then we have an episode called The Wonders of Froða. Froða being the farm where Thurid and her husband reside, so Thurid, the sister of Snorri Goði. And here we have a lot of ghosts who seem to be very displeased with their current situation, and they come back to haunt the living and to sit with them around the fire in the hall, so that's kind of unpleasant. And the next two episodes, they actually don't involve revenants, but they involve something different entirely. We have an episode of witchcraft involving a young man wishing to learn witchcraft who ends up tortured by one of the witches by the name of Gunnlaug. The young man is called Gunnlaug. And then we have an episode with the berserkers, I also mentioned earlier, the berserkers of Styr and their whereabouts and their actions and how they are eventually banished or killed, to be more specific. Right, so let's talk about Thorolfr. So Thorolfr is probably one of the most frightening apparitions in the Icelandic sagas. He is a revenant, and he is not by accident a revenant. Usually we have this idea that somebody has already began going on a rampage before they were dead. They were already these outcasts from society, or not necessarily, but on a fringe of society, in the sense that they were these people who were always trying to have more, not respecting the rules of the community, always trying to get more out of the situation, and also people who are not really integrated, in the sense that they might have come from elsewhere, or they might have been late comers. So Thorolf, for example, this is his case. He's not among the first settlers, but he comes later into this Icelandic landscape, and he really attempts by all means necessary to expand his territory at the expense of others, and also killing innocent people. And it is said that the older he got, the more violent he grew, and there was also a brooding conflict between him and his son Arnkel, who doesn't really share a lot of his violent personality. He seems to be calmer and more generous, and more oriented towards the greater good, the social good. So in chapter 30, it is described how he manages to kill this man called Ulvar and take his property, or attempt to take his property. So it is described that Thorolf was very well aware of the fact that this guy Ulvar, who was actually a freed man, so he used to be a slave, but now he was someone with a farm. He knew that Ulvar was very good at gathering hay, and initially he asks him for advice on how to gather this hay to stack it in a more efficient way. And they had joint ownership of a meadow up on the ridge. And one morning, Ulvar sent out his farm hands to the ridge to take a look at the haystacks there. And during the day, Thorolf used his oxen to cart the hay. But then again, he told his slaves to fetch Ulvar's hay as well. And upon seeing that, Ulvar is really furious, and he goes to the ridge to ask Thorolf why he was robbing him. But Thorolf just said he did not care, that to his mind it was the right thing to do because he really needed it. And then they engage in this infuriating conversation, after which Ulvar goes to Arnkel, Thorolf's son, but then again he was the chieftain of the district, so he was the one to go to if he had to ask his father to pay for the damages. But then when Arnkel talks to him, Thorolf clearly says to him that he's not going to pay anything, he would do nothing of the sort, and Arnkel actually ends up paying Ulvar's price for the hay instead of his father. And as a consequence, in autumn, Arnkel had 7 of Thorolf's oxen taken from the mountain pasture and slaughtered. Thorolf, of course, is furious because of that, and he asks why, and Arnkel calmly explains to him that it was to cover the cost of the hay taken from Ulvar, and this infuriates Thorolf even more. And then Thorolf plans to set fire to Ulvar's farm. He gets his slaves drunk, and he promises them to release them if they do this one thing for him, which is to set fire to the farm of Ulvar. But then This does not succeed because Ankel and his men notice what is going on, and they manage to save Ulvar, and then Ankel hangs the slaves who are responsible for this. This episode concludes with Ulvar making Ankel the his legal guardian. So he essentially gives his property for Ankel to protect him. Now, Thorolf is really miserable about this, and he goes to see Snorri the priest, who is the other chieftain, Ankel's competition. And he promises some very important woodland to Snorri. Krakanes, it was called, the whole region, and to possess a region with woodland at that time in Iceland was really a big deal, because wood wasn't that common, not at all. And Snorri thinks it over as the story goes, and he accepts ownership of this woodland, and he promises to raise a court action over the killing of Thorolf's slaves. And the main point he makes at the court is that Ankel took the slaves from where they were found, where they were committing the crime, and they put them to death elsewhere. And in this way, he manages to save the case. The story does not end well for Ulvar, because Ulvar does end up dead. And this time Thorolfur sets off on a journey to see a friend of his who earlier in the saga is described as this soothsaying man. He's called Sporgil, so he had some talent in divination or something like that. And he charges Sporgils with this very important task to go after Ulvar and to kill him. And he promises money, and because he really needs it, he swallows this bait, and he goes and takes the sword and runs Ulvar through with it. It's also kind of a funny episode because when they meet each other, Sporgils simply asks Ulvar where he got those beautiful weapons, and Ulvar, very naive and unknowingly, just hands him over the sword, and he ends up dead by his own sword. So he should have known a little better than that. But then we have different and new problems, because the former masters of Ulvar, the ones who freed them, the clan of the Thorbrandsson, then they come and request this farm. They request the property. They say that it should be their rightful inheritance. But then again, Ankel also has a case here, because he was the one to whom Ulvar personally gave the property in order for him to get protection. So he was his legal guardian. So how do you get out of this problem? Well, the Thorbrandssons seem to be at a loss here, and then they complain about this whole situation to Snorri, and Snorri doesn't seem to be willing to do anything more at this point. He says that simply that Ankel is just his way of being here, because he's going to trample on everybody's right in the neighborhood as long as he lives. This could also be interpreted as a very subtle way of saying, if you want to get rid of him, go ahead, I'm not going to stop you. But then again, the Thorbrandsson sons, they egg on Snorri and tell him that he is a coward, and that he never wants to defend their rights, and in every quarrel he is going to be the loser. So they really put fuel to the fire by using all these insults, more or less subtle, and so on. They plant the seed of a future conflict. Right, so what does Thorolf do? Because this is actually the continuation of his story. Well, he comes back to life. And how does he do that? So first of all, the story about how he dies is also very interesting. Thorolf Twistfoot gets really angry with Snorri this time because, as I stated before, he gave him some woodland, but then again, he notices that Snorri has really been profiting off this woodland, and then he claims he had only leased the woodland to Snorri, so he didn't have the right to make use of everything or in this manner. But Snorri, quite rightfully states to him that he no longer has claims over this land because it was already given. And following this conversation, he rushes to his son Ankel, and he states that he wants to be friends again with his son, and he wants to help him with the case against Snorri in order to recover his forests. But Ankel doesn't really seem all that thrilled about the situation. He's only about avoiding the conflict, so he doesn't do anything regarding the story whatsoever. And then Thorolf comes back at home. He is in a rage. He is infuriated. He doesn't talk. He doesn't say anything to anyone. And he just sits on his high seat. And then he simply dies. So he dies in that position, sitting on the high seat. And that was really a frightful thing to behold, as the servants themselves describe it the next day. It was something absolutely terrifying to see this huge dead man just sitting on his high seat, just the look of him was terrifying. And then we have some very interesting details about what they do with the body, because Arnkel comes to make sure that he was really dead. The story tells us. So we have from the very beginning some indication that something really bad is going to happen to this body. And Arnkel comes. He crosses the hall to get behind Thorolf, and he warns people to be careful not to pass in front of the corpse until his eyes had been closed. And then he takes Thorolf by the shoulders, but has to use all the strength he could summon before he could force him down. He wraps some clothes around Thorolf's head, so it was very important to secure his look, his head, to make sure that he doesn't see the living, or the living don't see him. Probably some kind of old superstition regarding the look of the dead that could actually trap you somehow. And then he had a hole broken through the wall behind Thorolf so that the corpse can be dragged outside. Because, again, this is something belonging to old lore, perhaps also to pagan times and so on, this idea of not knowing your way back home. So they were trying to avoid bringing the corpse outside through the door. That's why they broke through the wall and dug a hole. And then they brought 2 oxen. They hitched the sled with the corpse to the oxen, and then they tried hauling Thorolf to his burial place. And this is described as something incredibly hard to do. He is very heavy, and the oxen as well, they have major difficulty in accomplishing the task. And it is stated in the next chapter that they were actually ridden to death by demons. Well, very interesting. Thorolf wasn't laying quiet, the story tells us. He starts haunting the farm. He kills a shepherd, he kills some sheep, and it is also stated that nothing could approach his cairn, so his burial place. Any bird that happened to land on Thorolf's grave dropped dead on the spot. And then Thorolf starts haunting his widow, and she's driven out of her wits and eventually dies. So the people of the farm are so scared, and if they don't end up dead, they abandon the farm. And Thorolf essentially begins haunting the whole valley, and he kills everything in his path, and people start traveling in this area altogether because they were too frightened to do so. And then something very interesting happens, because Ankel, seeing how damaging this revenant is to the whole region, because this is not only about him destroying cattle or frightening people. This is also about rendering a place completely unviable economically speaking. So nothing, absolutely nothing can be done, nothing can be grown in this area anymore because of this revenant. So then Arnkel goes to, well, surprisingly, he goes to the sons of Thornbrand, who, yeah, he wasn't on the best terms with them. These were the blood brothers of his enemy of Snorri Gothi. But it is said that if you are asked to deal with a corpse, then you should have said yes. So that was something. This is something that the saga presents as some kind of a tradition. So the moment you are asked to deal with the dead, even if the dead belonged to a group that was not your kin or that was your enemy's kin, you are nevertheless obliged to conform and to help. And this is exactly what happens, because they dig up Thorolf's grave, and they see the body. The body is uncorrupted. It is hideous to look at. They lay him on a sled, hitch up a powerful pair of oxen, and then again the story about the oxen being exhausted, that they had to get another pair. Then it is also said that the oxen actually become mad, and they panic and break loose, and they go and drown themselves into the sea. Thorolf is described as having grown so heavy that the men could hardly shift him, but they do manage to drag him up to a small knoll nearby, and then they bury him. And they also built a wall behind the grave. And actually, he is put to rest, but only as long as his son is still alive. I will not go into a lot of details here because of time reasons, but Ankel is eventually killed following new disputes with Snorri and his blood brothers. And after he is killed, Thorolf starts haunting the area again. So later on in chapter 63, so this is towards the end of the saga, it is described that one of these people by the name of Thorod was farming at the old farms of the freedman Ulvar, who used to be the one protected by Ankel. Well, he sees that Thorolf Twistfoot ghost starts haunting the farms again and killing men and beasts alike. Again, the idea of terrorizing the whole area and provoking a lot of damage. And well, his tenants tell him that if he doesn't do anything, nobody is going to want to work here ever again. So this is really a very severe problem to put up with. And what he decides to do is to dig up the body again. And almost the same description. He was still lying there, uncorrupted, but with this very ugly and terrifying look. He was blue as death and swollen to the size of an ox. And this time, the people actually decide to burn the body. So they roll him down to the shore, and they build a great pyre, and they burn him to ashes. But then the supernatural does not end here, because we have a very strong wind blowing up, and as soon as the corpse began to burn, ashes were scattered absolutely everywhere. And it so happens that at the farm of this guy Thorod, there was a cow who apparently broke her leg. And initially, Thorod wants to slaughter it, but then he changes his mind because the cow was too slender, and he decides to actually send the cow to a different region with richer meadows in order for her to become fatter and then slaughter it. But then it so happens that this cow starts licking from the very place where the pyre was set up for Thorolf. And this whole story, as you perhaps can suspect, goes into a very uncanny direction, in the sense that this cow gets pregnant following her eating the ashes of the revenant, and gives birth to this calf. Huge calf from the very beginning. The cow also dies at birth, and it so happens that Thorod grows to like this calf very much, because he's strong, he's powerful, but he's also very friendly, because he lets him pet him, and yeah, he grows to like it very much. This, despite the warnings of his foster mother. His foster mother sees that there's something wrong with the calf when she hears it bellow, and she tells him that if he does not kill this ox in due time, this ox is going to be the death of him. And at the beginning, Thorod is like, yeah, okay, whatever. This is something, you're just rambling about. There is no need to be worried, and I'll just take good care of it. But then, if you really insist on it, I will slaughter it, which he doesn't really do. So he essentially lies to her. And then when she realizes it, she becomes very sad. She becomes quite desperate, because she's a soothsayer. She knows that something terrible is going to happen, and she's actually right, because this bull by the name of Glacier, which would mean something like the glossy one, something like that, this bull would end up killing Thorod. And the episode is quite brutal. One day, Glacier is on the meadows, and he starts tossing the hay into the air, so essentially scattering it all over the field, so rendering the work of the farmers useless. And at which point Thorod reacts, and he starts battling the bull. But this ends up very badly, because he tries to stop it. He jumps on the bull's neck, but then again the bull twists his body several times, and Thorod ends up with one of his horns in his stomach, and it is too late. Nobody can do anything for him. His men chase the bull, but then the bull, Glacier, he just jumps into a marsh and drowns, sinks into this marsh to never be seen again. And this is also very interesting, because Thorod is one of the people involved in the killing of Ankel. So in some way, we can interpret this episode as being the revenge of the father in the form of this undead bull against his son's killers. So it's also very interesting to see that the revenants, although they're monsters, they do tend to preserve one way or another the relationship, the old relationship they had to their kin. So this is definitely the most interesting story in the saga, and I think the most interesting story of all stories about revenants in Icelandic literature. It may be a little subjective, but it's definitely something worth looking into. Thorolf is not the only character who acts as undead in the saga. We also have a very interesting woman by the name of Thorgunna. Thorgunna is a Hebridean woman who lands in Iceland, and she brings some very valuable things with her. And she goes to live at the farm of Thurid. Thurid, who was the sister of Snorri Goði. And Thurid notices that she has these clothes with her, and she really likes them. But Thorgunna is very adamant towards selling them. She does not want to sell them at any cost, and this makes Thurid actually quite angry. Nevertheless, Thorgunna does continue to live with them at the farm. And Thorgunna is described as being this very large woman. She is very well built, and she is very well hardworking at the same time. And interestingly, she is also described as someone with a very problematic relationship to Thurid's son, who is Kjartan. Kjartan, who I think I mentioned this earlier, it was not the illegitimate son of her husband. It was the husband of another lad by the name of Bjorn. well, she develops this strong connection to the boy, and the boy himself, who I think he's 14 or 15, he's also described as being this very masculine character. So there's definitely something sexual going on here, and well, in any case, the character is shown to try as someone who tries to to point out the fact that she's still viable as an attractive partner, and she doesn't really want to be reduced to this old woman character. So she wants to be a little more than meets the eye. Well, the manner in which Thorgunna dies is also something very interesting to notice, because we have all kinds of omens surrounding her death. We have a very nice description of a blood rain in chapter 51. There is this very dark cloud, and it is described as something surrounding the whole farm, and then the hay is rained over by this whole blood. But then, while the hay of the other farmhands actually dries at some point, this is not what happens to Thorgunna's hay. It is completely drenched, and it stays drenched, and this can be interpreted as an omen of death. So yeah, she was also aware of that, which is why she stated the wish to be buried in Skalholt. So she essentially anticipates what would become one of the most important ecclesiastical seats in Iceland. This is the future episcopal seat, so one of the two, Skalholt and Hólar. Right, and there are a couple of men who want to fulfill her wish to take her body to this particular place. And what happens next is something, terrifying, but at the same time reassuring in one way or another, in the sense that halfway on their journey, they become really tired. They get really tired, and they stop at the farm on the road. And then the owner of the farm refuses to give them hospitality, which was something you didn't really do in Old Norse culture. You are supposed to help strangers, at least for 3 nights. You are supposed to offer them hospitality. But while they're left, they're allowed to sleep there. They're not allowed to eat, so they're not given anything to eat, which is why Thorgunna awakens from the dead. And what does she do? She starts preparing a meal for these travelers. And she is naked while she prepares this meal. So I think this is also an interesting detail, because again, it shows this kind of like anxiety and fear regarding not only death, but also regarding the naked body, regarding older women. I mentioned the odd relationship she had with Kjartan before. So there are all kinds of anxieties involved here. Now, she is laid to rest. However, the next happenings are quite alarming, because Thorir, who is the husband of Thurid, and actually the whole household of Thorir, suffer some kind of contamination, because essentially they all turn to ghosts. It is also stated at some point that she might have reappeared as a seal struck by Kjartan, who is the teenager boy of the household, and the hauntings of Thorgunna reappearing as a seal might have ended only with the bed furnishings being burnt. But at any rate, all these last aspects are related to the episode called The Wonders of Froda. This episode is described in chapter 53. So in this chapter, we find out that Thorolf dies, and some other people from the household die with him. And after the description of their deaths, it is also mentioned that the storeroom was also the seat of some uncanny happenings. It is stated that night after night they could hear something tearing at the dried fish. And again, a very interesting element to notice here is that all these happenings occur shortly before Christmas or Yule. So it was this time of passage when such happenings were more likely to occur. Now, they don't really see what was going on with the fish, but they do see a seal starting to rise from the floor, and everyone is paralyzed with horror at the sight of this seal, except for Kjartan, who rushes to take the sledgehammer and strikes the seal on the head until it no longer pops up. It is actually stated that this teenager boy by the name of Kjartan was the only one who could put fear into the ghosts. And I say this because these ghosts, so all of them, not only the party of Thorir, so with his shepherds and the other farmhands who died, they all tend to come back and they want to take part in the feasts of the hall. They want to take part in the dinners organized here. There was also another group. There was a group of people who went fishing because, like I said, all the fish was teared at and they had no food any longer. But then it is stated that they died. They drowned at sea. It might also have been the doing of this seal as well, but we don't really have any clear indication of that. So whether Thorgunna in the shape of the seal was also responsible for this. But at the beginning, when the people who were left in the household see this party who went for the fish coming back and joining them for the meal, although they were dead, they were actually happy to see them because, and again, here we have some kind of remnant of the past, or maybe it is something the author completely made up. It was believed that the drowned people had been well received by the sea goddess by the name of Ran if they came to their own funeral feast. So this is essentially what they were doing. They were attending their own funeral feast, but the problem is that they did not want to leave the place at all. So they were so attached to the world of the living that they did not want to accept the fact that they were dead. They were trying to hang out with the living and not leave them alone, which is something, long term it can get quite problematic if every evening you have to share your meal and anything else with a bunch of undead that don't really want to leave your house. So I suppose in the long term it can get really pressing, and they really want to solve this problem. So following a new wave of deaths after this creature tears up the fish pile, Kjartan takes matters into his own hands and he goes to Snorri to ask for advice. And they come up with something which is very interesting, a very interesting episode from the saga. How they get rid of the ghosts? Well, essentially, and this is something you will only find in this saga, the reference to the door court. So it is when you organize a lawsuit at the doorstep of a household. This might be, again, something the author made up or a remnant of more ancient pagan pre-Christian beliefs. We're not really sure. But at any rate, Kjartan holds a court at the door, and he essentially he essentially tells the dead that this is not their place any longer, and then that they don't have anything going on for them here, and they should be gone. So he essentially um, summons the dead to a trial, and following this trial, the dead admit that there is no peace here as long as they stay, so they go away eventually. And this is enforced by a priest coming to seal the deal, so to speak, with holy water. So, combining the lawsuit and more Christian practices, Kjartan manages to banish the ghosts. And the last episodes that involved the supernatural in this fascinating saga, one of them involves a so-called witch rite. So this episode is discussed at the beginning of the saga in chapter 16. There's something strange going on that also involves some anxieties regarding not only witchcraft, but also the position of women in society, women's sexuality, and so on. So, to cut a long story short, we have a character called Gunnlaug, and Gunnlaug is a very devout student of witchcraft. Now, when I say witchcraft, I don't really refer to the term as in this negative connotation that we have today. It's rather late Middle Age modern connotation, but I refer to knowledge, and it is actually also referred to knowledge as such in the saga. So witchcraft as knowledge. And Gunnlaug, in order to gain this knowledge, he visits Geirrid. And Geirrid is actually the sister of Ankel and the daughter of Thorolf, the revenant we discussed about at length before. Yeah, so Geirrid teaches Gunnlaug sorcery, and he seems very pleased with it, and he comes back constantly to her, despite this perhaps judgmental attitude from other people, because a very young lad comes and visits this elderly woman so often, and this actually provokes the jealousy of another woman, the widow called Katla, who was living quite nearby. So these two women were living almost next to each other. And she always invited Gunnlaug to spend some time with her, because it was on his way to Geirrid, and to socialize, something of the sort. She also had a son by the name of Odd, who was also a troublemaker in the future episodes of the saga. So one time when Gunnlaug was on his way, Katla makes the remark that you're going again to this older woman to teach you to, you're going to the hag to strike up her belly. So this is something she criticizes, and Gunnlaug gets really angry at this remark, because he's like, well, you're old too, you're kind of like the same, why are you telling me this? Which made Katla very, very angry. Upon his last visit to Geirrid to teach him sorcery, Gunnlaug refuses to take on her advice, because Geirrid is convinced that that night something very bad, something terrible was going to happen to him. But he tells her there's nothing to worry about. Geirrid knows that his stubbornness is going to cost him a great deal, and Katla again invites him to spend the night, as she usually did, but Gunnlaug refused. Gunnlaug did not come home at all that evening, and in the next morning he is found at the door, scratched all over his shoulders, and with his flesh being ripped from the bone. And this is described as a case of being ridden, being trodden by a witch. Now, I think the sexual connotations here are pretty obvious, but it's not only the sexual connotation. This also has to do with an older idea, yeah, the idea that you can be um, magically ridden, not necessarily physically, but also psychologically. So, for you to get a pretty severe trauma, to get traumatized following such an episode. Right. Geirrid is the main culprit here. She gets charged with having done this to Gunnlaug because he's so heavily injured. So he doesn't die, but he has to stay all winter. He's not allowed to leave his bed. But then at the trial, the jury of 12 judges does not come to any conclusions, and it's basically deadlocked, or at least temporarily. Well, it turns out later on that it was actually Katla, the one who provoked this whole situation and who had ridden Gunnlaug. And we only find out about this later on, after some other hostilities are described throughout the saga. This has to do with the stealing of some horses, and then Odur does something terrible at some point. He cuts off the hand of a woman, and then he's charged with the crime, and he's sought after, and Katla, his mother, tries to protect him. There's also a very interesting episode here where she attempts to transform her son into a distaff and then into a hedgehog of some sort, and eventually both Odur and Katla are caught, and when they are caught, they are stoned to death. Well, Katla is actually stoned to death because Odur is just hanged. But before being stoned to death, which was a pretty common penalty for sorcerers, not only in the sagas but also in the law codes, she actually utters a curse upon Ankel. Ankel, who was the brother of Geirrid. So she states that he is going to suffer because of his father much more than she had made her own son Odur suffer. And this curse actually materializes because, as you can remember, Ankel's father is none other than Thorolf Twist Leg, who had provoked all kinds of miseries after turning into a revenant. Finally, we reach the episode of the Berserkers. Again, I'll be very short here. Well, Berserkers in the sagas are not really the most pleasant of the characters. They're actually very frequently described as being troublemakers. So there are these people you don't want to engage in any sort of dealing with, because they tend to get pretty violent and unpleasant. I'm not going to talk about the historicity of this concept. I'm just going to say that all the indications that we have, all the pieces of evidence, point out into the direction that they were rather literary constructs and not real people. Regardless, this is not the point here. So we do have an episode with the Berserkers as literary characters in chapter 25. We have here two Swedish Berserkers. And these Berserkers, they were given as a gift by Håkon Sigurdarsson, the Earl of Lade from Norway, to someone called Vermund. Vermund was the brother of Styr, who was the father-in-law of Snorri Goði. So Vermund was also on a quest for fame and power, and he thought that possessing two very aggressive people at his farm would strengthen his position in Iceland. But then he realizes that he cannot really put up with their temper because, like I said, they could get extremely violent if they did not get what they wanted. So he tries to get rid of them, and he tries to persuade his brother Styr, who he wasn't really on good terms with, to keep them. And Styr wasn't willing to do that at the beginning, but he eventually takes them. And at the beginning, the berserkers and Styr actually got on well together. They were useful to have around the farm to perform different tasks. But then one of them, the names were Hatli and Leiknir, by the way. One of them, Hatli, took a liking to Styr's daughter by the name of Osdis, which more or less means goddess. And he really wanted to marry her. But then Styr, and this was actually the problem going on with his brother as well, he could not really find a wife for this berserk because nobody wanted to put up with something like this. At any rate, the situation was more dire now because it was Styr's own daughter that the berserker sought. So he didn't really know how to get out of this whole situation, and he requested the aid of Snorri Goði. Again, everything leads back to Snorri Goði one way or another. So he writes to Helgafell, which was the place Snorri resided, and he asked him what he should do. We don't really know the details of the conversation, but when Styr comes back, he seems to be pretty much in charge of the situation. And he tells the berserker Hatli that he is going to give his daughter for him to marry if he performs some tasks, like in the old days. First of all, to clear a path across the lava field, and then to set up a dike across the lava to mark the boundary between farms, between two farms, and then at last to build a sheep shed. And the berserkers actually managed to do all of this, and Styr tells them that it is time for them to rest, so they deserved some relaxation. But then he traps them into his bath house. So he invites them to take a bath, and then he seals off this place. He heaps stones on top of the trapdoor leading up from the bath, and in front of the door he puts an ox hide, and then he has a lot of water poured in through the skylight, and then the berserkers get really panicked and they try to get out, but one of them slips on the ox hide and Styr gives him his death wound, and the other one comes rushing through the door, and Styr drives a spear through him. Afterwards, Styr buries them in a lava pit so deep that nothing could be seen from it. And this was the end of the berserks. And this is something very interesting, that because you can also see it in the landscape. So there is a place on the Snaefellsnes peninsula called the Eyrbyggja Saga. Hraun meaning lava, so the berserker fields, and it is said, legend has it, that it is actually this place or somewhere in this landscape that these berserkers were actually buried. How can we interpret all these supernatural events? Well, there are multiple ways to do that. So, first of all, you should think of it as a complex mythological universe, but mythological not in the sense that it is not real or something like that, but in the sense that reality and non-reality somehow coexist, and all this mixes up with human concerns and hopes and anxieties. So in this sense, you can consider the supernatural as a powerful weapon to transmit ideas about how society was organized, what society believed in, what rules people had, and all these issues, complicated issues regarding violence, regarding death, sexuality, and so on, came into being. So in this particular saga, we do have a higher mythical world, so to speak, that is not really that present in other family sagas. And we have this idea of progression. So first of all, we have the issue of violence. There was no containment of violence before Christianization, but afterwards we have a shift towards a more organized society where you have both ecclesiastical and royal authority, as well as individual responsibility. All these aspects were highlighted in order to secure justice. And the supernatural, especially the episodes with the undead, they are representations of the past trying to challenge these new forms of organization, or to make people reflect on them. So in this sense, it's very interesting to think about that. Well, revenants especially, they come up a lot in times of crises. Somehow they're liminal creatures, and they also tend to pop out in liminal times. And yeah, we do have the context for that. We have the period of the conversion. So the conversion story, thought out as a kind of like a breach of boundaries. So you're going towards something new, and because you are somehow in a state of limbo until you figure out how to organize yourself better, this favors all kinds of apparitions and so on. And we do have this period of the Sturlunga family, like I said, as a transition period, and this also offers an opportune moment for these creatures to come to life. So it is a deep social commentary, in other words, with an insistence on the fact that at the beginning we're dealing with a lot of feuding and violence, but then we're shifting towards a more centralized authority, including the rule of ecclesiastical law, so not only the layman's law. And this also reflects a potential conflict between clergy and laity, in the sense that in the 12th century, in the 13th century, we're dealing with somewhat of a conflict between the Bishop of Holar, Gudmund, and the chieftains, Kolbeinn of Skogafjordr, for example, and others. And generally speaking, this conflict was about resources, access to resources, as well as the ecclesiastical jurisdiction over the members of the clergy. Why do I say this? Because if you remember from what I told you before, how the ghosts, so this company of ghosts, was banished during the episode about the wonders of Froda, we're dealing here with two possibilities to banish these ghosts. So first of all, we're dealing with a lawsuit. So this is something that has to do with laity, with worldly matters and how they are solved. And then again, we also have this idea of the church getting involved in order to solve the problem. So perhaps this supernatural event could also reflect a potential tension between the church and chieftains. So this is something worthy to think about. Then again, the threat of monstrosity, so the monster as a symbolic double, is also noteworthy here, in the sense that the monster is used to reflect not only the challenges of individuals, such as Arnkel or Snorri or whomever, but also the challenges faced by a community in its entirety. But of course, in our particular saga, it's a very good opportunity for certain characters to rise and integrate socially. And here I don't really mean Snorri Goði. This time I'm referring to Kjartan, who was the teenage boy who is the son of his mother's lover, actually. So he was not the son of his father. So he also had this kind of liminal position in society, but because of the fact that he's the only one who manages to banish these ghosts, he becomes more integrated in society. Yeah, he becomes more accepted. He also becomes accepted by his uncle because he asks him for his help, and they actually collaborate in order to fight this evil. And generally speaking, this would be the last point. We can study such apparitions from the point of view of memory studies very well, in the sense that a revenant, an undead creature, is someone who forces us to enter a dialogue with the past. What the past represents for us, whether we can regard it as something very mythical, very heroic, or perhaps whether it is something that we should ditch altogether in order to better deal with the present and with the future. And in this particular saga, we can notice both a nostalgia and a rejection of this mythical past, because, like I said, the topic of violence, that is something very something recurrent in the saga, tends to be better tackled in the second part of the saga, where we have a violence coming from the direction of the supernatural belonging to the past, and then we see the community acting together in order to refrain this violence from spreading everywhere. There is also some kind of antiquarian interest for paganism in the saga. However, it's somewhat difficult to figure out whether we are dealing with true pagan elements or with memories of pagan elements. And what do I mean by this? Well, in a nutshell, we have at the beginning of the saga, for example, a reference to the pagan temple of Thor on the sacred mountain, on the Helgafell, but it's very uncertain whether such a thing would have existed at all. Then we also have some interesting references to nails that used to decorate the high seats. So according to the sources, there was this custom that if you were a chieftain coming from Norway and if you wanted to find a suitable place to live in Iceland, you would cast away into the sea the high seats, the pillars of the high seat, and then wherever they were cast ashore, then that would be your place to settle. This is also something that you see in the story of the settlement of Reykjavik, for example. So the first settler of Iceland, Ingólfur Arnarson. We also have an interesting reference to human sacrifice here, but well, it's only a very vague reference. I don't think it can be considered as such. It is also in connection to this pagan temple of Thor. Actually, a lot of these pagan elements seem to have been derived from Christian sources as well. For example, the idea of Thor fishing for the serpent can be very well correlated with the myth of the monster of the Leviathan and so on. So we should be very careful when describing these elements as being completely pagan. And of course, we have the elements already mentioned in the stories about paranormal activity. We have a lot of divination and soothsaying throughout the whole saga. Now, this can be interpreted in two ways. Either it is something that is used as a literary device in order to further the plot towards the conclusion, or to justify some actions and happenings. It just contributes to the general development of the events and the characters, but then perhaps it can also be a memory of more ancient practices, the so-called Seidr magic of Old Norse. Of the Old Norse world. There is also the idea of magic as knowledge. So the character Gunnlaug insists on that when he takes lessons from Geirrid. So magic is described as a very important source of knowledge. And then again, we have themes such as shape-shifting and transfiguration. For example, that when Katla turns her son Order into a distaff to prevent the enemies from seeing him. The idea of the wild ride, or the evening ride, where you have these magical happenings when someone being both physically and psychologically traumatized one way or another. And when in reference with our revenants, with the undead, we have the idea of leading an afterlife in the mound, and the burial mound seems to be very important here, because in a way it can be interpreted as a portal, as a door between the world of the living and the world of the dead. So this whole mix of elements makes the saga absolutely wonderful. As a conclusion, yes, we do have a lot of paranormal occurrences, and I think the best way to interpret them and to describe them is as a reflection of a tension. And the tension can be discussed on multiple levels: a tension between the present and the past, between a more violent, so to speak, legendary Germanic mentality and the beginnings of a differently organized society under the influence of Christianity. The tension between all these older and newer ideas somehow coming together and creating these stories. So that was it from me for today. Thank you very much for listening to this very long presentation. And I hope you found these episodes I briefly tried to present interesting. And I really hope you're going to read the saga, because it is one of the most fascinating ones in the whole corpus of old Icelandic literature.